Shabbat Shalom to everyone, and mention a couple of Yortzites. Raphael Langham had Yortzeit today, but the Yortzeit is just ending now for his father of blessed memory, Tzvi Eliezer ben Mordechai Yitzchak. I hope that he too, like you, Raphael, was an England supporter. Jaime Wolanski also had Yortzeit today, Meir ben Yehuda Leib for his father, and Josiane Gold also for her father, Yosef ben Shlomo. But this Shabbat, the Coleman family, that is Cecilia for her husband, and that's the father of Andrew and Johnny and Alexandra, Alex and Maurice. They have Yortzeit for her husband and their father, Gershon ben Rav Avram. Aubrey Fishman, who has not been coming to shul yet, has Yortzeit for his mother, Yocheved bat Yaakov, and Howard Goldsobel for his mother, Sarah bat Miriam bat Tzvi, all this Shabbat. Well, one day, a Jewish man wakes up late for a new job interview. He quickly takes a shower, he eats breakfast, gets in his car, and when he finally gets there, he can't find a parking place anywhere. And he looks, he circles around. It's getting later and later, it's getting more and more tense. It's a really important job interview, and he just doesn't find one. Finally, he prays to God and he says, God, if you find me a parking spot, I'll go to shul every Shabbat. I tell you what, I'll throw in one more thing. I'll never lie again. And a minute later, he finds a parking spot out of the blue. And he says, hey, God, forget the deal. I just found one. The question is it permitted to do deals with God, even if you're not going to keep your side of it? Well, there are a number of examples in biblical examples in the Torah. In the Midrash, Rabbi Shmuel ben Nachmani said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, 4 biblical figures initiated vows. 3 of them asked inappropriately, but God nevertheless responded appropriately, while the 4th asked inappropriately and God responded in kind. And he goes on to explain that the first was Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, when tasked with finding a wife for Isaac. The second was Caleb in seeking a suitor in marriage for his daughter. The third was King Saul in promising his daughter in marriage to the man who would take on Goliath. And the fourth was Yiftach in the book of Judges, who promised to sacrifice the first thing that walked through his door if he was successful in his battle with the Ammonites. And bad luck for him, the first thing that walked through his door was his daughter. Actually, it was worse luck for her, because as the story unfolds, her father's obliged to fulfill his vow. And then there are 3 instances in the Bible where an individual or a group strike a deal with God and specifically use the expression vayidar neder, and he or they made a vow. The Hebrew word for vow is a neder, and vayidar is the verb, so vayidar neder means and they made a vow. The first instance is in the book of Genesis. Jacob is fleeing from his home to avoid the wrath of his brother Esau, who of course he had tricked out of his birthright. His future is very uncertain. Vayidar neder, and Jacob took a vow, saying, if God will be with me and he will keep me on this path that I go, and will give me bread to eat and a garment to wear, and if I return to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone that I've established as a monument shall be the house of God, and everything you give me I will tithe for you. It was the deal of the century. The second instance actually happens and occurs in this week's Parsha, Chukat, and it takes place shortly after Aaron's death. The king of Arad attacks the Jewish camp. One person, a maidservant according to Rashi, was captured in the battle, and the Israelites resolved to counterattack and to recover their hostage. Vayidar neder, and Israel took a vow to the Lord and said, if you deliver this people into my hand, I will destroy their cities, meaning that none of us will take from their spoils. And the Lord heeded the voice of Israel and delivered the Canaanites into their hands, and Israel destroyed them and their cities. The third instance in which we have this expression, v'yida neder, is the case of Yiftach that I've already mentioned. So do these examples show that it's okay to make deals with God? Rabbi Shmuel ben Nachmani calls the vows made by Eliezer, Caleb, and Saul and Yiftach as inappropriate. But perhaps it was just the nature of the vow that he finds inappropriate, but not the vow itself, because in all the examples he mentions, the vows contain very ambiguous commitments relating to the marriage and the identity of potential mates or suitors. He's making vows on other people's behalves in which they have no choice in the matter. And that's kind of like, today you would call that abuse. That's immoral. So perhaps in situations of impending risk and danger, as in the three instances that we encounter the phrase v'yida neder, perhaps in those instances it is permitted to make a vow. And don't we all strike deals with God in situations of crisis, God forbid? As it happens, the sages caution us not to make verbal vows. And this is more because of the pragmatic consideration that we may not be in position to fulfill the vow, rather than a theological distaste for the concept of doing deals with God. And that's why you'll hear religious Jews always add the phrase bli neder, without making a vow, when they're committed to something. So, for example, they specify that their undertaking is not going to constitute a vow per se. I'll meet you at 4 p.m., bli neder, without making a vow. And that kind of covers you if you arrive an hour and a half late. It works. Bli neder, just say bli neder, I'm not making a vow. Nevertheless, even though the whole idea that a mortal creature can strike a bargain with the creator of the universe and hold him to account to keep his side of the deal is completely nonsensical, perhaps there are circumstances in which it is actually helpful. If a vow, making a deal with God, of course in one's heart rather than verbalizing it, for the reasons that we've explained, if making a vow or making a deal with God is used as an incentive and a spur by the person making the vow towards a superhuman effort in facing a challenging or desperate situation, then the vow becomes an expression of faith that God is not going to disappoint you, even when sometimes the outcome looks very bleak. So perhaps when we make these kinds of vows or deals with God, it's ways in which we actually dig deep down inside ourselves to do things in a much deeper, more committed way. And that's why we turn to these deals in moments of crisis, because the stakes are really high. And it's not about holding God to account. It's just about expressing, I have real faith that if I put in all the effort, I know in my heart of hearts that God will hear me and that he will respond. And therefore, it seems to me that in the difficult moments of our lives, in a moment of illness or other kinds of crises that occur, especially when we find that we may not be deserving of divine favor, that he doesn't owe us anything, maybe it's okay to turn to the power of a payback pledge in order to secure a loan, so to speak, from a beneficent God. Or in the immortal words of the mafia godfather, to make God an offer he can't refuse. As Rabbi Shmuel ben Nachmani observed, God responds to even inappropriate vows. And sometimes we need to make them as well. Shabbat Shalom.